Amazing how one impulse decision can change the rest of your life. I had one of those moments when I was 9 years old, and I up and decided that I wanted to make a video game. I immediately enlisted my mother to bring me down to my local library, and I found a book on C++, which at the time was the only programming language that I knew about. I got home all excited to make something amazing. Then, several hours later, to my extreme disappointment, I realized that all I had done was make some text appear on the screen. Given that I was 9, I guess I can't blame myself too much for giving up. Then something happened. To this day, I have no idea what prompted this, but my dad sat down with me and taught me how to use PowerPoint. Yes, PowerPoint. He showed me how to use hyperlinks to link different slides together, and we made a little presentation about the Wild West. I don't think I realized it immediately, but suddenly I had my tool. So, in the next couple years that followed, I did something that I wouldn't recommend to anybody who doesn't want to experience a lot of unnecessary pain. I made full-fledged video games in PowerPoint. Later, I found tools that were actually meant for doing what I wanted to do. But it still amazes me, and it makes me laugh when I think that my dad, who still won't carry a cell phone and who knew as little as I did how to make a video game, was the one who gave me my first tool to do so. That was the beginning of a journey where somewhere along the way, I decided that I wanted to make software that would change the world. When I got to college, I was lucky enough to find other people who wanted to do the same thing. And instead of telling you about the things we've made, I'd like to show you one of them. This here is the Microsoft HoloLens. It's an augmented reality headset, and if you don't know what that means, you'll see in a second. I'm part of a team of students that is using this headset to help NASA design the next generation of spacesuit. Right now, when astronauts go on spacewalks, they actually just use paper instructions that are secured to their wrists. NASA thinks it's time to find a better way, and so do we. Enter ARSIS, the Augmented Reality Space Informatics System. And I'm going to show you a little video about how it works.
When they need it. We here at Boise State have designed
is actually the view from inside the headset. So when you have the headset on, you're seeing holograms that are overlaid over the real world. And they have a position in space, so you can walk around them and leave them where they are. What you're seeing right now is a path that is directing me to where I need to go. And when I get there, I'm going to use a voice command. Our version of Siri is called Adele, so I'm going to say Adele procedures, and then it'll just bring that menu up. And it's going to walk me basically through the task that I need to complete. And as you'll see in a minute, just say next to go to the next step. Yeah, and then as I look away, that panel actually stays in the same spot. So I can place those panels wherever I want to in relation to my workspace. And I can place as many of them in my space as I would like as well. So that was a lot of what we did last year. This has been kind of an ongoing 2-year project at this point. And one of the big things that we've done this year is telestration, which is a word that we didn't know about until somebody emailed me and said they were really impressed by our telestration capabilities. And then I was like, wow, there's actually a word for this. This is cool. So what we did last year is we actually had it to the point where the HoloLens could take a picture. So you could say capture. It would take a picture of your view. It would send it down to mission control, and then they could draw on it, like circle something to help you out in a little bit more visual way than they might be able to over voice communication, which is what they use right now in space. And this year, we said we wanted to take that to a whole new level. So we actually used the depth sensors in the HoloLens, which can detect things like walls. There's no walls in space, but solid objects. And so what we're doing is we're actually taking the 3D data that the HoloLens has about that environment and sending it down to a virtual reality application that mission control can be in. They can basically see in 3D that environment that the astronaut is in. And then I'll show you a video about how that works. What you're seeing on the right is the view from inside virtual reality. And then on the left is the astronaut's view in the HoloLens. It's a hotel hallway, but we can imagine that that's outer space. And what the person in virtual reality is doing is they're drawing things in that space. And those drawings are being sent in real time to the astronaut. Yeah, and so obviously instead of drawing little stick figures, what this would be used for is circling things, drawing arrows, maybe even walking around and drawing entire paths to show the astronaut what to do. And so yeah, that's basically an overview of what ARSIS is. We have been working on this for 2 years. Last summer, 5 of us went down to Houston, Johnson Space Center, tested it out. And then actually just last week, we sent another group of 5 down to Johnson Space Center. They did some testing with some other universities who are working on similar prototypes. And I hear it went very well. So we're actually going to be demoing this if you'd like to try it out afterwards, over at the table, over that way. Definitely encourage you to try it out. In the meantime, how did this all come to be? Well, I learn and work and sometimes live at this place on campus called the GIM Lab. The GIM program is all about creating software that does something meaningful. So when Steve Swanson, our resident retired astronaut, came to us and told us about this challenge that NASA was putting out, we assured him that he had come to the right place. And then we all sat down and we pulled out our sunglasses and the cool hacking music ensued. And we sat down and we wrote steady streams of code until the thing was built. Okay, not exactly. Actually, if there's anything that I've learned through working on this project and others like it, it's that that's definitely not how it works. Oddly enough, this process of making software to change the world has changed my outlook on what it means to change the world in the first place. There's a lot of creativity that goes into creating something like ARSIS. My personal favorite part is the coding, that mystical thing that I couldn't figure out when I was 9, but I've since learned to love. A lot of people don't think that coding is a creative thing, but it really is. See, creativity is all about limitations. When you write, you're using the words that you have to convey an idea. Music is all about using the sounds that you can make to express an emotion. Likewise, coding is about using the tools that you have, the commands that you can execute to solve a problem. I like this particular form of creativity that I found in coding because it becomes kind of a tug of war between you and the universe, because the limitation that you're dealing with is logic itself. As it turns out, the universe is always right. I would like to say that coding is that cool hacking thing that you see in the movies, but a lot more often, for me at least, it looks like staring at my computer and wondering what's wrong with it, thinking that it's such a paradox that I've written my code to do this specific thing, and it still doesn't work the way that I expected it to. Often, I discover that it's my thinking that's the paradox. I find myself against this solid wall of unmovable reality, and I realize just how shaky my own conceptions and my own logic can be. It amazes me every time when I sit down and I try and draw a picture of what I was thinking, how I expected my solution to work. And that's when I realize how many inconsistencies were coexisting in my own mind that I couldn't even see before. Sometimes we create these inconsistencies that we see in reality, not the other way around. I've noticed that programmers almost invariably regard the human race as stupid. I think it's an occupational hazard caused by working with perfect machines every day. And as soon as I started coding, I began to see what they were talking about. But in a way, it's not depressing. It's kind of wonderful that there exists outside of us something so real and true and unmoving and mysterious as this logic that we work with. At the same time, it's really easy when you realize this to become kind of paralyzed. It's definitely made me realize that I'm not qualified to know what a perfect world looks like. At the same time, I'm also realizing that it's exactly the people who know this that the world needs. I went through a lot of my life thinking that someday I would know what I was doing. I would see people who had a little bit more knowledge or experience than me and who were doing really cool things. I would kind of draw a line, say like, yeah, they know what they're doing. I definitely don't. And yet, as I've gone on, I've begun to realize that everything I do now looks a lot more like 9-year-old me trying to make a game in PowerPoint. And that's the thing. Whenever you find yourself at a frontier, whether that's personal or technological or the edge of the known universe, there's no way to know what you're doing. And that's incredibly scary, but why be anywhere else? The people who do great things aren't the ones who know what they're doing from the start. They're the ones who aren't afraid to start anywhere. That's how this project really came to be. None of us had touched the HoloLens before Steve came to us and told us about this challenge, but we didn't let that stop us. And I think any of my team members could attest that it was a long and tedious process, but we figured it out. So it's through this process of daring to stand before the universe and code that I realized that changing the world is not about defining what needs to be done and doing it, but about learning to see. It's not about knowing what you're doing from the beginning, but about learning to begin. It's about having the courage to dream and then getting down and getting your hands dirty and trying it out. And if it doesn't work, then changing your approach and maybe even your goal. It's this beautiful process where you begin to realize that whatever you're creating is changing you as much as you are changing it. And that's a beautiful thing. That's what the act of creation really means. And I say the act of creation because the dream and getting your hands dirty are both necessary. The dream is empty without the work, and the work is meaningless without the dream. So for anyone who has a dream to do something or to make something, change the world, whatever it is, just start somewhere. Don't be afraid to let the journey change you. Don't be afraid to change your direction as the world shows you what needs to be changed. And if you know someone who has dreams of their own, teach them something. Seriously, even if they want to design video games and all that you know is how to use PowerPoint. I often come back to the famous quote from Kennedy at the beginning of the space race. We choose to go to the moon, not because it's easy, but because it's hard. I'd like to rephrase that slightly. We choose to go to the moon not because we know how, but because we don't. And that's the message that I'd like to leave you with today. Whatever frontier that you may find yourself at in your life, whether that's a project, learning something, the act of creation, whether it's some frontier that exists in the depth of your own heart, reaches of outer space, anywhere in between, go there. And do it not because you know how, but because you don't.